I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Amelia Neptune. I'm with the League of American Bicyclists, and I'm really excited to invite and welcome all of you to the Bikes Count 2022 Data Competition Winners webinar. Just a quick introduction for today's webinar and some housekeeping notes first. We are recording this, and we'll share a copy of the recording out with attendees afterwards, along with a copy of the slides. You'll also see that closed captioning should be on for you or should be enabled as an option. You can turn on or off at any time with the show or hide subtitles option from the bottom of your screen. And this is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting, which means that attendees don't have the option to come on camera or unmute themselves, unfortunately. But we do have a chat box that you're welcome to engage with each other and with us in. And you're also more than welcome to submit questions at any time via the Q&A box, and we'll be moderating that and monitoring both of those throughout the webinar. And to get started, I would love it if attendees could please tell us where you're coming from in the chat box, and let us know where you're viewing from, and if you have a viewing party there with fellow colleagues, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Now, just a quick introduction to the League of American Bicyclists. We're hosting this webinar today. We're a membership-based bike advocacy organization leading the movement to build a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. And we've been partnering with EcoCounter for a number of years through our Bicycle Friendly America program. We've done a lot of different webinars with them over the years. And I'll actually put a link in the chat if you're interested in topics like today's webinar and you would like to view other recordings of previous webinars we've done with them, along with other webinars on the topic of bike data. Please feel free to check those out on the Bike League YouTube channel. But we really have appreciated our partnership with EcoCounter over the years. Because data collection is really important to building a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. Both qualitative and quantitative data are so essential, and we know that communities, businesses, universities are collecting this in a number of ways, and both the qualitative and quantitative data is so important to understanding who's riding, where people are riding, why they aren't riding, where crashes are happening, all of those things. And I'll also give a quick plug if you're interested in bike data. The League has an entire website dedicated to national and local data around biking at data.bikeleague.org that's supported by the CDC's Active People Healthy Nation initiative. So I wanted to plug that because it's a really great resource if you're looking for different sources of data about your community or peer communities. So feel free to check that out, and I just put the link in the chat. Now, on to today's webinar. This is something we've done now with EcoCounter. This is the second year we've done this Bikes Count data competition that we launched in May earlier this year for the second time. And this is a competition where entities that have bike data are invited to submit their data to us. And we selected winners who would receive analysis from EcoCounter. And the idea here is a lot of different groups and entities and communities have lots of bike data, but don't always know what to do with it. And so getting that help with the storytelling and data analysis and number crunching can be really useful in helping communities understand what their data means. So for the second year in a row, we were able to select two categories of winners. And this year we were actually able to select 3 total winners because we got some great submissions from neighboring communities. So for the first category, which was a BFA Bicycle Friendly America program participant, Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Department from Lincoln, Nebraska is our Bicycle Friendly America participant awardee. And then for the category of advocacy organization, we received great submissions from both Madison Bikes and Bike Fitchburg, which are 2 neighboring communities in Wisconsin. And we were thrilled to see that correlating those 2 communities' data together would yield really interesting results. So I'm excited to introduce all of our presenters from these 3 places, in addition to our friends at EcoCounter, to present to you all today and to hear about what they have learned and what they're doing with their data. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia White at EcoCounter. Thanks so much, Olivia, for being here and for helping to organize today's webinar.
Thanks, Amelia. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So my name is Olivia. I work with EcoCounter, and I've been working with Amelia over the past couple of years in our partnership with the League of American Bicyclists. And like Amelia said earlier, we started the Bikes Count competition last year because we really wanted to kind of inspire all of the people that we see collecting bike count data with different types of analysis. So like how that data can be visualized and shared. Because there's a lot of emphasis on collecting data, but it's important to show what like the narrative of the data and what we can get out of that. So with that, we started the Bikes Count competition, and I'm really excited to kind of see the results that we came up with today for the winners. I'll start off and just explain a little bit about EcoCounter. So EcoCounter, we make bicycle and pedestrian counters that can be used all over cities, trails, urban and rural environments, parks, that sort of thing. We work with different agencies and organizations across North America to develop their counting programs. And this is all in an effort to promote the idea of evidence-based planning and promotion of data as a deciding factor in how we're going to create healthy communities. So today I'm just going to briefly introduce the different types of bicycle counters that are out there, why we want to collect data, why it's a good thing to collect data, and how we communicate that data. And I'll start off by saying a lot of people will begin their counting programs by doing manual counts, which is a great way to get started and get an idea of how people are moving about, whether it's pedestrian or bicycle counts. So I'll start off with that, but today I'll mostly be focusing on the automated counts that you can get out of counters. So we have a tube counter that is a mobile counter. It can be installed on bicycle facilities that are on street and off street, so on trails, that sort of thing. And these can be moved around, so they're good for collecting data at multiple locations, so short-term counting sites, that sort of thing. We also have Zelt counters that will collect data more permanently at permanent sites. And these are electromagnetic loops that are installed in the pavement. So they'll be collecting or they're sensing the bicycle's metal as it passes over the sensor and selecting it out. These are also battery powered units. The tube counters are also battery powered. Moving on to why we collect data. So there's a lot of different things that data can tell us. Largely, people are looking for like kind of long-term patterns and how people are moving about in their community. So the graph that we see here is just a very quick, simple example of the type of profile of data you can get from counting. So on this chart here, we can see a 24-hour clock on the bottom, so kind of showing the hours of the day where people are being counted. And then each line on the graph is showing a different day of the week. So from this chart, again, it's a very simple display of data, but it tells us a lot about how this particular facility, it's a trail, how people are biking on it. So we can see that there's a very clear weekend use of the trail. So earlier in the morning, there's more people out, whereas on weekdays, there's more of a commuting pattern where there's an early morning peak, a lunchtime peak, and then again, at the end of the day, another peak for the weekdays. Another cool thing you can do with bike count data is over longer periods of time, you can show the changes of how travel patterns are evolving. So one of the ways that we saw this in all communities is that a lot of travel patterns changed during the pandemic. And looking at longer term counts, we're able to see the effect of lockdowns and changes to deconfinement that happened in different areas. So this is more of a look at longer term data. Generally, there's different advantages to collecting data for different periods of time, but even with just 2 weeks of data collection, you can understand some pretty cool things about your community and how people are moving about. So this will, help to create baseline counts on a shorter term level and just get a general estimation of how people are moving about. Whereas the longer term data, if you have counters installed for 6 months or a year or over a year, you can make you can have a better estimation of how things are evolving in terms of like, do we need to create more space for certain user groups on trails, that sort of thing. Lastly, I'll be talking a little bit about data communication, and that's kind of the essence of this project with the Bikes Count competition. So the data collection was done by our winners. They were able to provide us with data. And then from there, our job at EcoCounter was to create really cool visualizations of that data and help to show a narrative or a story that goes along with it. So one of the things that we do at EcoCounter is we will do custom studies for the different communities that we work with, and those custom studies can have different goals associated with them. Sometimes it's looking at how a community has evolved over, the years that they've collected data, so kind of a longer term analysis. Other times it's looking more specifically on things like safety analysis, so showing the crash rate for bicycles in a certain area, and intersections that need to perhaps be there should be an intervention there because we can see the crash rate is higher. So that's more of a data fusion that can be done, but just to show that there's a lot of different customization that you can do once you do have that count data collected. Another thing that is important in looking at longer term data is the data reconstruction that can be really helpful if there's ever any data gaps that appear. And data gaps happen for lots of different reasons. Sometimes there's a battery that's dead at a counter. Sometimes there's something blocking a sensor, but for whatever reason, those data gaps can happen, and there's tools that you can use for reconstructing that data so you can get a longer period of data to analyze. That's something that can be done, internally with EcoCounter software, or that's something also that we do for longer periods of time with our data services team. And I wanted to show as well some of the more public elements of showing data and showing a story with data is with infographics. So these are very short, easy to read, shareable infographics that we can create. And what's shown here is one of the winners from last year's data competition, so Charlottesville. We created a nice infographic kind of showing the evolution of cycling in their community, or they can be kind of more focused on a single theme like winter cycling in Ottawa. And just to kind of end off, the thing I wanted to kind of emphasize with this competition is that sharing data is, I would say, the most important part of these counting programs. So letting people know that, this is how people are traveling in the community, and getting people interested in cycling can often, a part of that can be done through sharing of data. So this will help to justify any investments or bring attention to areas of, cycling in your community that you'd like to bring attention to. So with that, I will end off, and I'm really excited to see the results of the data analysis that was done. So I will hand it off to Stephanie now.
Thanks, Olivia. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, so I'm Stephanie Rouse. I'm with the Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Department. I'm a transportation planner there. I've been with the city a couple of years now, and specifically in this role about a year. And one of the big parts of my job is to manage our trail counter program, which is a year-round program because we do have permanent counters as well as peak seasons in the spring and the fall with our mobile counts. So just a little bit of background on Lincoln and our biking community. We were awarded a Great Places in America award from the American Planning Association for our trail network, which is pictured here. These are all of our trail systems. A lot of it is thanks in part to visionaries using rails to trails. So a lot of these are old railroad corridors that have been converted into some pretty awesome trails that connect throughout the core of our city. We also launched a bike share system that is mostly in our downtown area back in 2016. We adopted our on-street bike plan in 2018, and we were awarded a designation as a silver bicycle friendly community in 2019. And a quick history of our counts program. So for a little over 10 years now, we've been, or 10 years ago, we started doing counts once a year with volunteer support, a couple hours at some various locations. That evolved into one permanent counter location in 2014. We got installed on one of our trails, the Rock Island Trail System. That data, the original version, we had to pull manually, and so we go out every couple months to get the data off of that counter. In 2015, we purchased the first mobile counter, which we kind of moved around to a couple scattered sites, but didn't really have a program for it. It mostly went to events and things like that. 2017, we installed 4 more permanent trail counters along our trail system, and those ones were transmitting data automatically into EcoCounter system. And then in 2021, we installed our 6th and final counter on our N Street cycle track, which is a separated cycle track that runs through our downtown and connects out into one of our more popular trail systems. And we also purchased an additional 2 mobile counters. And then in just this year, 2022, we launched a more focused mobile trail count program, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this is all the locations, or most of the locations that we've done counts at so far. As EcoCounter is finishing up their analysis, we were still doing some more fall counts that aren't reflected on this map, but all of the permanent count locations are our blue dots, and the temporary locations are the red dots. And you can see that overlaid with our trail facility. So there were 21 short-term locations that reflected here. We're actually going to hit 32 locations by the end of the year once we pull our last counter off the trail system in about a week. And we strategically locate these along key trail networks and our separated facilities. And looking at our annual daily cyclists at the permanent and temporary counter locations, it shows that our bicycle activity is strongest on our trails and our cycle tracks, which tends to grow as you get closer towards the downtown core, which is where you can see the Billy Wolf trail at N Street cycle track. That's kind of the edge and the core of our downtown. And some of the key takeaways from that data, our Rock Island, Billy Wolf, and our Mopac trails are the most used cycling trails within the city of Lincoln. And some of the others that had some higher counts are the other end of our Mopac trail at 48th Street and our Tierra Williamsburg trail. And then looking at average annual daily cyclists, it shows the Rock Island and the Billy Wolf trails. Those are pretty high, very similar average annual daily cyclists. And then there's a pretty big difference once we get into the rest of the trail system there. As you can see, rates of bicycle use do drop off. And this is from 2022 counts. And you know, the average annual daily users is pretty similar. Already mentioned that. So going on. So one of the most interesting things I think that came out of this competition and EcoCounter going through and cleaning up our data was looking at the impact that the pandemic had on our trail use. You can see here that we had 20% more cyclists during the week, with significant increases in our midday and our late afternoon traffic on the trail system, which makes sense. As more people were working from home, they were able to get out and use the trail system that's adjacent to their house, because a lot of our trails cut through neighborhoods. Can also see that there was a big increase in our weekend cycling throughout the city, with increases of 45% in 2020 as compared to 2019. And then specifically looking at the Rock Island counter, this is the one where we installed the very first trail counter back in 2014 and have the most data on. It has increased pretty steadily at about 5% annually from 2015 to 2018. Really took off in the pandemic years between 2019 and 2020 with a 51% increase in traffic on that trail system. And then kind of post-pandemic, if there is such a thing, in 2021, 2022, it kind of maintained that pre-pandemic level activity. And then just some highlights on the Rock Island system. So you can see in 2015, we had about 120,000 users throughout the trail that year. Bikes in 2020 peaked at 198,000. About a 70% growth in cycling during the weekend in 2020 as compared to 2015 in the first year that counter was out there. And an overall 61% growth in cycling during weekdays in 2020 as compared to 2015. And then looking at our end street cycle tracks, so as I mentioned, this goes through our downtown core. It connects to, on one end, the historic Haymarket, which has a lot of businesses, restaurants, our arenas down there. There's a lot of new housing, and it goes all the way out to the second most trafficked trail counter that we have on the Billy Wolf Trail. So it's a good connection, completely separated facility to a cycle track. And we just installed that permanent counter in October of last year. We had some puck style counters on it previously, but they were pretty spotty and unreliable and just weren't giving us good data. So we made the investment and installed a permanent counter. And so we have 1 full year now of counts on that system. And the analysis showed that we have a pretty good winter retention rate, 30% of cyclists compared to the peak season. And we did have a pretty mild winter last year. I think we only had maybe an inch of snow twice. So it really was a great year for winter cycling in City of Lincoln. And then it is primarily a facility that's used by commuters, but there is a pretty good amount of recreational use on the cycle track as well. You can see the darker kind of green teal color peaks in the morning and evenings when you would see the commuter traffic. And then on the weekends, it's a little later in the morning, kind of tapers throughout the day. And so some of the takeaways, you can see the poster here that EcoCounter put together, which is going to be a great marketing tool to show the impact of the Trail Counter program and hopefully advocate for additional facilities. But like we mentioned throughout the presentation, Rock Island, Billy Wolf, those are heavily used routes for the cycling network. We saw an increase on the Rock Island Trail, steady growth of about 5% annually. Permanent count data has revealed that our trail network experienced overall growth on both weekdays and weekends during the pandemic. And introducing our short-term counts has allowed for a better understanding of our cycling activity throughout the city and the region instead of just those 6 permanent locations. And so looking at what's next for our counter program, as I mentioned, this year was our first year of doing the mobile counts. We've done about half of the sites. Spring and fall of this year, we'll do the second half to get all 27 locations counted over 2 years, and then keep repeating that to establish a pattern at those different mobile count sites. We've started reporting the data on an interactive website and update that monthly for our permanent count locations, and then as we have it for our mobile count location. And then we're just trying to determine what else we can use this data for. We do a lot of data analysis for grant applications, and there's some other organizations in town that use it as well, but trying to find, excuse me, another use for some of the data information. So here's just a clip of our interactive website, 2 ways you can access it, shown there on the left, but the image here is we have a location map that shows all of the permanent versus mobile count locations. There's a landing page for the permanent trail counters that has some charts and maps that are interactive, and you can click different things on and off. And you can click into any of the 6 counters. It pulls up a page that gives you some charts and graphs specific to that counter, and it's monthly trail counts and bike ped share, and then the raw data that users can look through. And then our mobile counters, because they're only out for 2 weeks at a time, have less data, but still have some estimates and bike share or bike pedestrian shares and the data collected during that time frame. And then, as you know, one of the next ideas for what to use this data for The bike lanes were counted right at the end of this competition, so it wasn't ready for EcoCounter to use in their analysis. So I was going to share a little bit about that. We have 2 bike lanes, on-street bike lanes. Neither of them are separated. One's on 13th Street and one's on 11th Street. Both lead into downtown. They're 2 blocks apart from each other. And you can see 13th Street has 35-mile-per-hour traffic next to it. It's a pretty narrow bike lane, not separated. There's not a lot of businesses along it. Whereas 11th Street has parking on either side of it. It's 25 miles per hour. It's more residential. There are some businesses, coffee shops, restaurants to go to. And you can see the difference in the counts that our mobile counter program revealed. In the same 2-week time period, we had half as many users using that 13th Street facility as we did on the 11th Street facility. So trying to use this data to show building better bike infrastructure really does pay off in getting more users out on those facilities. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Harald to talk about Madison's data.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will get my screen share set up. So just give me a second, please. All right, here we go. So my name's Harald Kliems. My pronouns are he, him. I'm one of the co-founders and the current board president of Madison Bikes. In my day job, I'm a health researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in pediatrics and prevention research. And maybe based on that, you can already tell, like, I care a lot about data. I'm kind of a data nerd. I enjoy data analysis. And so that's part of what drove our application for this grant. And so I'm super excited to now actually be able to present some of the results from that. Sorry. Forwarding my slide here. All right, Madison Bikes, who are we as an organization? So we're an all-volunteer bike advocacy organization. We are very locally focused on Madison and its surrounding communities. Our vision is a city where anyone can ride a bicycle conveniently and comfortably to any place in the city and neighboring communities, such as Fitchburg, for example, year-round. We've been around since about 2015. We advocate for any kind of riding, but really our focus is on transportational riding, partly because other organizations cover things like recreational riding. So we really want to create the ability of a low stress, all ages, all abilities network in Madison and around. And yeah, the outcome of that, we think, is more people biking. And that's why we care about bike counts, because that's one of the main measures of success. A little bit of context around where we are here in Madison, and maybe if you have been to Madison, can you put Madison in the chat window just to get a sense of like who has been here before? I saw some familiar faces in the participant list, but I also saw that there are people from all around the US in the attendee list. So just put Madison in the chat if you've been here before, and I'll keep talking while we do that. So this is on the left here, a map of Madison. You see we are located between 2 or 3 big lakes. The state capital that you see back here is like right in the center. We have this narrow isthmus that is kind of this bottleneck that a lot of things go through. There's a lot of high density in residences and in employment in this downtown area. Here is the UW-Madison campus. That's a picture of the UW campus. And then, yeah, as you go out a little bit, the density goes down. Down here, we have Fitchburg, where Steve Arnold will talk about that later. And yeah, we have winter here, as you can see. We get quite a bit of snow. And so similar to what Stephanie said, you see some of those seasonal effects. It's great. Our bike network, our primary paths are plowed 7 days a week in the winter. So you do see people out there in the winter, but not as many. You will also see like these are like the major freeways. Madison is fortunate that we actually do not have any freeways going through the center of the city, which is not that common in US cities of our size, unfortunately. And the other important thing to note about biking in Madison is that UW, I mean, it's the biggest employer. There's lots of students, there's lots of staff. They have very good policies around, you have to pay for parking. And so all these things together, I think really make Madison a great biking city. And that's probably also part why we were acknowledged as a platinum level bike city, bike-friendly community by the League of American Bicyclists. So this is the same map, reorient yourself, same lakes, state capital, UW, and these are the locations of the bike counters. We have a lot of them. Before we applied for this competition, I didn't actually realize how many of them we had. There's actually even a little bit more that is not on this map, but there are 20 automated bike counters in Madison. 18 are of the Centrax variety, and 2 that people are probably most familiar with are the ones down here and over here, because they are the eco counters that have the display. So whenever you ride past there, you can actually see the number jumping up once. And yeah, you see the annual count and you see the daily counts. And again, I'm a data nerd. I enjoy biking past there. Down here in green are the Fitchburg trail counters, which Steve is going to say more about. And the colored lines are really some of our major bike paths. So here you have the Southwest Path, here you have the Capital City Trail. And what this shows you is that basically these are rail trails and you can get through the city, you can get through the isthmus from one side of the city to the other, basically on off-street paths. Some of the intersections are grade separated, and that's a great facility. You see in the light green also there's lots of other bike infrastructure. Some of it is bike lanes, some of it is also separate paths. So we do have a pretty nice network, but also some gaps in there. What do the counters tell us how many people go past there? So just to orient yourself, the darker the color, the higher the counts are. So you can really see the darkest colors are over here. This one is a little bit tricky to see because there's 3 counters very close to each other, but these are ones where you have over 1,000 people. And this is June 2022 data going past there every day. When you get out a little bit to the farther out locations, you see that the counts taper off a little bit. So the activity for biking is really centered in downtown, on the isthmus, and near west and near east side, and then specifically on those trails, because those are the most convenient convenient ways to get through the city. This is the same data, just in a different format. So you can again see these are ordered by the number of counts in June. In June, you know, it's summer, it's a great month. It might not actually be the busiest bike month because UW is not in session and students and staff do contribute to bike counts. But yeah, you can see the center locations have the largest counts, and then, yeah, it slowly tapers off. And I mean, the difference is quite stark between like 250 and almost 10 times as many bikes. When we don't just look at June, which may not be a typical day, and I mentioned winter having a big impact, the pattern is basically the same. The numbers are different. So now the highest range is between 500 and 1,000 daily cyclists, but still you have these central locations that drive a lot of that traffic. And once you get out, yeah, the dots get smaller and you don't have as many people riding there. Now, these were daily counts or annual counts. A lot of interesting stuff similar to what we have seen in Olivia's and Stephanie's presentations is related to the impact of the pandemic. So let's start by looking at hourly counts for the weekend bike traffic. So this is the typical weekend bike traffic. Somewhere in the early morning, slowly, you have more people riding on the trail. It peaks somewhere between noon, 3, 4 p.m. and then it slowly peters out, where you still have some people in the evening who probably get back from wherever. But yeah, really the peak is in the middle of the day. On average, you had 153 bikes that were counted between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. And so this is one of the eco counter locations. So this is 2016 to 2019. So what happened in 2020 with the pandemic? Similar to what we saw in Stephanie's presentation, this peak is going up by quite a bit. So 21% more average daily weekend bike traffic at this location. And the growth was very much concentrated in that peak. So what was already pretty peaky got even peakier. In the evening, things slowed down a little bit more because probably people weren't going out as much. So I think that also makes a lot of sense. If we add the next year, 2021, now we're kind of in the middle where it's higher than it was from 2016 to 2019, but it has also come down from the peak in 2020, as you can see. Pattern still the same, and here you see things start overlapping there, but still 8% more in 2021 than the average between 2016 and 2019. Now, finally, we get to 2022 and the year is not over yet. So I guess we have to take that into account. Now, really, the weekend traffic looks very similar. I mean, technically, it's a little bit lower, 3%, but you can see the lines almost overlap, both in shape and how high the number is. So it seems like, at least when we look at weekend traffic, maybe the pandemic impact is mostly canceled out here. So weekday traffic, very different. Similar to what we saw with Stephanie's presentation, we have this pattern of a morning peak, very noticeable, things slowing down a little bit during the midday, and then in the afternoon having a very pronounced peak. Okay, there we go. Now, this was something that I think we expected to change with the pandemic. I mean, UW instituted lots of remote working and remote teaching policies. And so I added this slide here, which is not eco-counters analysis. This is American Community Survey. And this webinar is not about American Community Survey data, but I think a lot of you will be familiar with it. A lot of people use it because often it's the only thing that's available if you don't have these bike count data. But I thought it would be useful to look at that. So when you have these counter profiles that seem to be driven by a lot of the commuter traffic, then what happens when you have a pandemic? And this is happening. So basically from 2010 to 2019, whenever we looked at the ACS data, it's kind of boring. Nothing really changes. Driving is kind of like somewhere around 70%. Walking and transit is somewhere around 10%, and biking and working from home is somewhere hovering about 4 and 5%. So you never got really anything interesting. A lot of it was in the margin of errors. But then if you compare 2019 to 2021, you can really see how driving went down, working from home exploded, and transit went down, and walking and biking were kind of still the same. So that was really interesting, and I was very curious to see how that is then reflected in the bike counter data. And I think we can see that very well, where if we look at 2020 data, this morning hump basically disappears, like it's almost flat there. And while you still have an afternoon peak, things went down quite a bit. And in the midday, yeah, everything smooths out a little bit. So really the biggest change is here in the morning commute, and this increase here and the decrease there. Again, we layer over the 2021 data here. And similar to what we saw in the weekend traffic, things are starting to smooth out. Like the morning peak is coming back just a little bit. The midday increase is going down a little bit, but still above the previous year. And the afternoon, yeah, that's more or less the same. And finally, then in 2022, we see more, like the morning peak suddenly is back. It's still not as pronounced as it was before. The afternoon peak is going up a little bit. But yeah, overall counts are still a little bit down compared to pre-pandemic. So to recap the takeaways from the data, the Cap City Trail and the Southwest Path are the most important cycling axes. That's where you see the highest count and where you really see the highest counts with quite some distance to any other counts. When we looked at the hourly counts, you could really see the impact that the the pandemic had. I think this was not a surprise to me. It probably wasn't a surprise to other people here in Madison, just based on what we observe in our daily lives of how the pandemic has impacted that. Yeah, really this disappearing of the commuter cyclist and maybe the increase in recreational traffic was something that was to be expected. But on the other hand, as we also saw, now that it's 2022 and yeah, it's not post-pandemic, but it's something not right in the middle of the pandemic, some of these patterns start to come back. A couple maybe higher level takeaways from this competition, from the results that I've taken from this. I would say coordinating regionally about bike counts is really important. One thing that we have learned through this process is, I mean, we didn't even realize that Steve and Bike Fitchburg had put in an application. We didn't realize who was already doing counts. The university, for example, has their own counters. Apparently, the county has some bike counters. So there might already data be out there that you are just not aware of. So talking to other people in your communities and see what they already have going is highly recommended. Using different data sources, I mentioned ACS data, we mentioned data counts. I mean, all of these have their limitations, their issues, and data quality. And so taking them together can really help you get a more complete picture of what is happening with biking in your community. Stephanie mentioned this, making data available for others is really great. The city of Madison put some of the data on their open data portal, because I mean, there are people out there who have data analysis skills and ideas that can take that and really do something with it, even if you don't have the ability to do that yourself. And then the final thing before I hand it over to Steve is, I would also encourage you, and sorry to EcoCounter, I mean, don't get too focused on getting ever more data. Don't let yourself get paralyzed by being like, oh, well, we need more data before we can make decisions. Because often we know what works with biking. We know that if we build safe and comfortable infrastructure, more people will bike. So some of those things, like just do stuff and the numbers eventually will probably show it. But if you don't have the numbers right now, then that's okay. And with that, I will hand it over to our neighbors from the south, Steve.
Thank you, Harald. See if I can do this here. That should be the right screen. I'm waiting for it to come up. Is my screen being shared?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. It's not appearing on one of my screens, so. All right, thanks for having us, and thanks for the technical support from this competition. Fitchburg is 6 miles square. It's about 1/3 suburban. It's like Canada. Everybody lives along one edge. The southern 2/3 is agricultural and natural area. So we are home to 3 state trails and beautiful scenery, and so it's great for biking. This is a view from some of our glacial hills in Fitchburg with Madison visible on the horizon. Bike Fitchburg is our local advocacy group. We're all volunteer. It was established in about 2015 or 14 as we applied for our 2015 bicycle-friendly community application. We were awarded bronze in 2012 and silver in 2015 and 2019, and now we're trying to get to gold. We were interested in counting bikes because we learned from the bicycle-friendly community application feedback that bike counts are really important. Now, we've been stuck at silver for 2 application cycles, and the Bike League would really like to see that all the great things that you've been doing in your community have actually moved the needle on average daily trips by bike and mode share. And so we want to be able to show that we're doing better than the American Community Survey, the default data source, would show, because that asks how many, what's the primary way you commuted to work in the last week. So it's capturing only commuting, only people who biked 3 days are going to make that statement that biking is their primary mode. And so we show a very low number, even though that's not the case for the number of people who are biking in Fitchburg. We also want to be able to guide municipal and private investment in biking. We want to justify it by showing trends over time. And we want to be able to use spatial distribution of biking to determine whether we're being equitable in provision of bike facilities, where we need to be investing the most in the areas that have been most neglected. My background slide is a Free Bikes for Kids bicycle giveaway event in Fitchburg. Everything that Bike Fitchburg tries to do, we try to do through the lens of equity. So referring again to the same slide you've already seen, the green counters are our new permanent counters in Fitchburg. Not shown is an identical counter here on the Cap City Trail that's run by Dane County Parks. And as Harald mentioned, there's a lot of people out there who are interested in counting bikes. They maintain the Capital City Trail in Fitchburg and the town of Dunn to the east, and are interested in their mountain bike facility too. Our counts were started based on feedback from our 2015 Bicycle Friendly Community application. We did manual counts. You can see in the backdrop of this slide, the data sheet we use. We count at the Velo Underround. That is a place where 5 regional trails come together. We'll show you some pictures. And it's an interesting place because it's a complicated place to count, because we have to count people coming in and out, because they may be going in any of 5 directions and coming from any of 6 sources. So we count in 15-minute intervals so that people don't get too fatigued trying to mind all the, you can see here 25 bicyclists coming from one direction in a 15-minute interval. Because we had a history and because we knew it was important for gold, bicycle-friendly community status, our city government stepped up and used $50,000 worth of room tax dollars because we promote the city as a bicycling destination to buy 7 or 8 traffic counters. These are infrared counters that count all trail users, not just bicyclists. And those are the things that are marked with the green dots on the map. This is the Velo Underround, and that's one of the permanent infrared counters there on the directional signpost on the right. We've already seen these slides showing that the busiest places are these.
Steve, can I just interrupt you? It doesn't look like your slides are advancing. We're still on the ARC.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
There we go. Thanks.
I have to use a non-intuitive screen to advance my slides. So there's the Velo Underround, and there's a counter here, and there's another counter on this post, and there's one up above on the Badger State Trail, and off to the right where the mountain bike park is the Dane County Parks one. And let me get back to this one. Okay, so you can see here the regional trails. The Southwest path leading to the Badger are rail trails, as is the Cannonball. The Cap City Trail through Fitchburg and Dunn is actually a sewer trail. It was a benefit of building the Nine Springs Interceptor, which collects the wastewater from a large portion of the metro area. So it's much hillier and curlier than the other trails. But you see that we have major traffic at the Underground and at the northern edge of Fitchburg through the Cap City Trail, diminishing as we go farther into the rural area. This is another way to look at it. This is a Strava heat map. You can see clearly the Southwest Path and the Badger, which are white hot. Also Seminole Highway, which we don't count, which is was the main urban escape route before the Badger was built about 10 years ago. And our two mountain bike trails, Parks and the Velo Underground, also show up very clearly. Strava data tends to be contributed by athletes and training, people who are out recreationally. And so it is not necessarily a real reflection of the relative use of your facilities geographically. However, if you want to go out and find a bunch of bikers to impress city officials, I recommend it. Look for those white hot routes. These are some of our trail numbers that were extrapolated. We have longitudinal data from our manual counts over 5 or 6 years, and we have data from the automatic counters over the whole city, but only for about 8 months. And so together we use those, or the Eco Counter data analysis team use those to project our data over the entire city for over time. And you can see some of the counts here. Now, our American Community Survey number is 0.75% bicycle commuting rate. So that would be about 210 trips with our population a day, a weekday. And so if you project these back to a daily basis, or those numbers to an annual basis, this is showing about triple the amount of riding that the American Community Survey would indicate from commuting alone. And that's very valuable information when it comes to scoring well on your bicycle-friendly community application, or for talking to city leaders about investing in safe facilities. Very similar daily patterns from our automated counters. And I can tell you from doing these counts myself that most of our counts are bicyclists, probably over 90%. Another picture of the Velo Underground. And here we're taking a comparison of projecting from our one-day counts on the first Tuesday, Tuesday of the first full week of June, which is Wisconsin Bike Week. And we also count some Februaries for Winter Bike Week. Taking those and using the counters over the automatic counters around the Velo Underground to project an annual average of bikes. And you can see that pre-pandemic to this year, it's increased nearly 50%. So that's partially because more people are biking and we have better facilities. The Velo Underground and the Cannonball Trail that goes from the foreground to the background in this picture were completely closed all of 2021 to update the sewer coming through here. But as part of that project, they did improve it. In addition to new asphalt, they increased the width of the Cannonball Trail from 10 to 12 feet. And people like good facilities, and so it's drawn a lot of traffic. This shows the traffic patterns through the Velo Underground. The Southwest Path and the Cannonball Trail, Cannonball Path, are the ones that are most important in getting to Madison. The Capital City East Trail leads to one of our mountain bike parks and also to most of Fitchburg and points east toward the lakes. The Badger goes all the way to Illinois and is used principally by recreational cyclists. And then the Military Ridge State Trail goes to the other small city of Verona, where one of our major employers is Epic Systems. There are just a huge ton of people that love to live on the trendy, busy, active, mixed-use downtown Madison, and they come out the Southwest Path and go out the Military Ridge to Epic every day. So that's our biggest commuter route, and we only count in the morning, assuming that about the same people will return at night to shepherd our volunteer hours. But those are the results we see, and they make a lot of sense with the employment patterns. Some of the conclusions that we've drawn: put a stake in the ground with some manual counts. It's super easy. And if you just do it the same way every year, you'll actually get valid data that you can show to people, showing increases. Consistency helped, but unfortunately, when you only count one day, once or twice a year, weather can affect it very significantly. So I would recommend, if you have the volunteer resources, to count 3 Tuesdays in a row or 3 days a week. We were trying to go for impressive numbers to impress city officials, and so we looked for the most people. So we counted at our commuter hotspots. That's fairly easy. Trying to figure out how to judge how we're doing in the whole city is much harder. But we are hoping for great things from our new automated counters. And almost any data are better than the American Community Survey for a Bicycle Friendly America application. This is a view from the bridge at the Velo Underground. That's me on the left with the clipboard counting bikes. Bagels are very helpful and coffee to attract bicyclists. And with that, I will turn it back over to Amelia, who will run the Q&A.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much, all of our presenters. That was really great to hear all the perspectives. And I especially appreciate Harald's comment about the importance of regional coordination, both because we have seen that as something that is so important. And we didn't realize when you both submitted that you didn't know that each other submitted applications to this competition. So that's fun to know. But I also just wanted to mention that we've added regional coordination as a topic to the Bicycle Friendly Community application because we felt that it was such an important aspect of both bike advocacy and bicycle planning to understand the connections between and across communities. So thank you, Harald and Steve, for being great examples of that from your advocacy in your respective cities. And we did get one question that Stephanie already answered in the typed Q&A, but I thought it was worth mentioning the question of using counters for on non-protected facilities, meaning paint-only bike lanes, to understand who might be biking and if it doesn't yet have safe facilities, where to put new lanes in or where to upgrade facilities. And I recognize we're at time, but I wanted to mention that as sort of food for thought for all of our speakers and our listeners and viewers when you're thinking about bike counts of those before and after and understanding rider behavior. So I wanted to plant that seed since I wasn't sure if everyone could see that answer or not. But Stephanie, if you wanted to add anything out loud for those who are still on the call, I welcome any other comments you have on that.
Yeah, no, I think that doing those counts on the 11th and 13th Street bike lanes that are painted but not protected was really valuable information to have and to show others once we are able to kind of promote this and to take to our elected officials to prove that more protected infrastructure like our N Street cycle track, which is very heavily trafficked, is needed in our city, and other things. Like we noticed when we're out there, there's a lot of sidewalk riding, which is hard to capture. And so we've been considering doing things like video technology that can record 4 or 5 days of use in the area, and then you can funnel it through AI to get actual bike counts of who's riding on the sidewalks, and then use that information to say there's plenty of people in the area, they need good infrastructure, and make the case there.
That's great. Thank you. So recognizing that we're just a minute past time, I'm going to let everyone go, but I wanted to thank our speakers again, and thank you, EcoCounter, for helping co-host today's webinar and the competition, and for all the great data analysis that you've done with these communities. And yeah, if folks have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the League, and we can forward you on to the respective speaker or to EcoCounter. And thanks, Harold. I see you put your email address in the chat. I'll put mine in there as well. And we welcome any questions. And I also want to put a plug in that we will probably do this competition again next year. So if this is something that you think your community or advocacy group would find useful, keep an eye on the League's e-newsletter so that you could apply for this and get the same kind of assistance for your community. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again next year with EcoCounter. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate your time and interest, and look forward to continuing our data conversations and future webinars. Thanks a lot, all.
Thank you all.